I was matriculating at the Art Institute of Chicago. The dean of the school had a suspicion that I was not going to win a traveling fellowship. So he engineered it that I would receive a summer scholarship to Skowhegan here in Maine. As it turned out, I did win a traveling fellowship and spent a year in Europe. But on my way to Europe, I had a summer in Skowhegan, and that's what brought me to Maine. And it was because of a visit to Skowhegan that I met the gentleman who invited myself and my friend to come and see his island, which was Vinalhaven. And it was on that first day that I saw the Star of Hope, and within 10 days, Elliot Ellisoffen, former Life magazine photographer, bought the building for me. As I say, my life is full of coincidences, and it's just an interesting coincidence that the man who bought this building for me, who brought me to Vinalhaven, was a staff photographer for Life magazine. Well, if there was one important influence in my life as far as art went, it was Life magazine, because for the first time, there were good reproductions of American paintings, as no other magazine had ever. Remember, it was Life magazine that even gave Picasso a whole issue, nothing but Picasso from one end to the other. And it played a great, it was a great influence in my life. Over the years, the Oddfellows called their building here several different names. And when I riffled through some old stationery upstairs in the attic or in one of the closets, I found that at one time they had called it the Star of Hope. And since stars have always been one of my favorite motifs, why, that was the one I chose. This is also Casa d'Amour. I mean, it's not only the Star of Hope, it's Casa d'Amour. And as far as I'm concerned, love is still the most important thing. It all comes from a little painting which is now in the Portland Museum of Art. There were four stars, two stacked on two, with the word just the regular word love down at the bottom. And that gave me the idea that the letters could be stacked as the stars were stacked. And just at that time, the Museum of Modern Art commissioned me to do a Christmas card for the museum. And that I submitted 3 designs or 3 color variations. And of course, they chose the one that became best known, the red, blue, and green. And that became the most popular Christmas card the museum had ever issued. And from there, it just went on and on. But when pop started exploding, there was a great rush. Dealers were scurrying around trying to enlist this new breed of artists. And the lady who gave me my first one-man show was Eleanor Ward, the Stable Gallery, and I had 3 shows there. And it became uncomfortable when, in the 60s, when people took advantage of it not being properly copyrighted, that there were endless ripoffs, and that could have been suffocating. But fortunately, the 60s and the 70s are long gone, and it's no longer a problem. The loves being red, blue, and green came about because of a Phillips 66 sign, which I used to see every day of my life when my mother would drive in to pick up my father on his 38th Street office. We would pass this huge Phillips 66 sign that was up in the sky. And in those days, Phillips 66 gasoline stations were all red and green. And it was the red and green of that Phillips 66 sign against the blue sky that accounts for my favorite colors. It is, of course, my goal that love should cover the world. Individually, it is growing, and we're already laying plans to make a 24-foot love. It's like Mount Everest. We all know what the highest mountain in the world is, and the larger love gets, the more attention it will receive. And of course, I haven't restricted myself to the English language. Ahava is the Hebrew word for love, and now I've involved with the Chinese word for love, which by coincidence happens to be I, and I, of course, is my first initial. Love wins out in the end, you see, and as far as I'm concerned, that's as it should be. My name was Robert Clark. All one has to do is look in any telephone book, and there are too many Clarks. And I simply wanted to steer away from that kind of being swamped in a sea of names. Know that somehow or another, of course, there are several artists named Smith, and the Smiths didn't seem to feel that they had to change their name. But there's a difference between Clark and Smith. As far as I'm concerned, probably my major regret is that due to love and what happened in the 60s, I'm only identified as a pop artist. And of course, I certainly didn't start out life as a pop artist. I started out making art when I was in before the first grade. This is the mill across the street from my grandmother's house in Mooresville. And in a department store in Indianapolis, this was my first painting sold for $10. And on eBay, I recently picked it up for $6,000. The first grade, that school turned out to be very important in my life because at the end of my first year, I would do drawings at home and bring them in and present them to my teacher in the morning. But it was that same teacher who, at the end of that first year in Mooresville, Indiana, asked if she might keep a couple of my drawings because she felt that one day I was going to be a famous artist. So I had no choice. It was inevitable. I had to become a famous artist. And 40 years later, I go back to this little town, and she's no longer teaching, but she's alive, and I have a coffee in her house. Never saw her in between. And she jumps up and goes in the bedroom and brings out my two drawings. And what she wants is that I sign them with my new name. She didn't want Robert Clark, she wanted Robert Indiana's, you see. The most important person in my life who greatly influenced me, of course, was Ellsworth Kelly. And our meeting was just pure chance. I'd been working for 3 years at an art store on 57th Street, and I had gotten up to the position of being able to arrange the windows. And I put postcards on display. And one day someone came in and asked for Matisse's Still Life with Oysters, and that person happened to be Ellsworth Kelly. He had a very lousy studio at the time, and I was desperately in the need of a new studio, and he just happened to know someone down on Coenty Slip who had some empty buildings available, and steered me to my first loft on Coenty Slip. Was $30 a month. And that was the beginning of my most productive period, was on Coenty Slip. But after he had found me my loft on Coenty Slip, he found another loft on Coenty Slip. I couldn't have afforded it. It was $45 a month, and he could. And so for several years, we were neighbors on Coenty Slip, and then his old painter friend from France, Jack Youngerman, moved to the Slip with his wife, who was the French actress Delphine Seyrig. Then Agnes Martin showed up, and then James Rosenquist was another customer of mine at the art store, and he came and brought his friend Charles Hinman, and pretty soon we had a colony. Very private little enclave, all within 3 blocks of each other. Unfortunately, they began tearing those old buildings down, and we all had to clear out in the around 65. We were gone. What developed was my influence from Ellsworth, and that was simply hard edge. I had never considered painting in this manner before. Kelly initiated that, and it simply led to other things. Well, let's say that for the early part of my life, I was simply a figurative painter. It was only when I met Ellsworth Kelly that I stopped being an American realist and became what I am now. I was stuck with the dilemma of being too much influenced by Ellsworth. I had to make some kind of a radical departure, and that was the addition of the word. And then shortly thereafter, Ellsworth never spoke to me again. He didn't like paintings that had words. He's a real Puritan. I've always considered myself the least pop of the pop artists, but given my place in time and what happened in the art world, I can't escape that designation. None of us really liked that term at the beginning. Other terms were used: new realists, vulgarians, all kinds of things, and then Lawrence Alloway's pop stuck, and we were stuck. I consider my work primarily autobiographical. Almost everything I've done has some relationship to something in my life. I am painting and writing my own history. My involvement with numbers started with my mother and her insistence on moving from house to house in Indiana. Before I was 17 years old, I had lived in 21 different houses. And for my mother and father, their only amusement was really the automobile. And so we'd jump in the car and go driving around and check out all of those houses that we had lived in. And of course, there was a number one, and there was a number two, and there was a number three. It was in and around Indianapolis that I lived in those 21 different houses before I was 17 years old. My mother simply always had the feeling that the next house was going to be better than the last house, and as it turned out, it was just the opposite. As we moved on through the Depression, the houses got tackier and tackier, and of course, in Mooresville, it was my father was. Oh, we have a friend. Bring that guy. Bring that guy over, Bo. He wants to be in the film. Oh, it's my old buddy. Yes. Get in back of me. Hey, what are you doing, kid? Hey. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? He's a nice guy. All right, Dale, you have to. We lived under an international harvester factory, and the fumes and the smoke from that factory were beginning to affect my health. This was before I started to school. And the doctors told my family that we should move from that location and into country air. So that's necessitated the move to Mooresville. But on the farm in Mooresville, my father was definitely not cut out to be a farmer. My mother, however, loved animals, and I even had my own calf named Daisy. And when we moved into the house, it was found that the well was not good, and a new well had to be dug. And in the meantime, I would take my what did you call those little wagons down to a neighbor's house and fill up glass jars of water, and I would bring them back up the hill. And that's how I made my first money, selling water to my mother and father as they toiled on this house in Indiana. Yay! Noisy guys. Well, I think we should talk about the dogs in my life. Dan.
Absolutely.
Well, this is the Suzu is the latest dog in my life. She happens to belong to one of my most valuable helpers, and she's a very new addition and probably one of the happiest I've ever had. She's a sweetheart of a dog, very, very affectionate. We got a good close-up of Suzu.
Yes, we do.
Oh, Suzu, you're going to be famous. Yes, Dale's going to make you famous. He is. Her predecessor happened to be a pit bull.
Didn't you have a Great Dane at one time?
Oh, yes, I've forgotten the most impressive dog of all, and that was Casso. He was so named so that when we took him for a walk, we could say Picasso, and out of deference to one of my favorite painters, of course. And he lived here on Vinalhaven and managed to break my leg, pulled me down a snowbank. So I've had better luck with cats, let's put it that way. Given the portrait of my mother and father, which was done in the middle of all of this 1960 business, that's about as realistic and as figurative as you can get. They're taken from actual family snapshots of my mother and father, slightly altered to make for a more arresting situation. And I really meant to continue that. The only trouble was those two paintings took me 4 years to finish, and it was almost too much a labor of love. And whereas I had meant to continue Mother and Father, they stand finished as they are. No, I wanted to do 4 seasons. As it stands, Mother and Father are standing on a very wintry road by their Model T in Indiana, and the thought was to do autumn with leaves on the trees and summer with green leaves, and then of course as the seasons got warmer, Mother and Father would begin to shed more clothing, whereas at this point she stands with one breast exposed and my father has no trousers on. As spring and summer approach, there'd be less and less until I ended up with a nude mother and father, and shocking people is kind of fun too, and I think that might have caused serious repercussions, you see. Some of my most important years, just personally and for my art, was the fact that I transferred from a country school. I was living with my mother. My mother and father had been separated. The country schools had no art, and I felt very, very deprived. Then my father, who was still working in Indianapolis at Phillips 66, invited me to join him and his new wife, my stepmother. And it just so happened that my stepmother's father, was a janitor at Arsenal Tech, one of the largest high schools in Indianapolis. But the real grabber was the art department had a faculty of 12 teachers. And that's when I became very involved with journalism. I was the photographic editor of the school yearbook, and then got a job at the Indianapolis Star. I worked at the Indianapolis Star for 3 years, so I became very close to journalism and writing and most importantly type, because in those days things were still printed with type. And my letters, of course, the three-dimensional letters are really just big pieces of type. And I worked my schedule out so that in my senior year, out of an academic day of 8 hours, I had 6 hours devoted just to art. And that probably couldn't have happened in many other places. And I had a marvelous art teacher who, a lady watercolorist from Philadelphia, who inspired me to go on to, it was at her recommendation that I went to the Art Institute of Chicago. The GI Bill, this was 1940, 45, 46, was about to expire, and so I think I had the premonition that that was a good time to enlist in the Army, and I got a 5 years of free schooling via the GI Bill. I spent a year in Alaska, did a little bit of artwork, but more journalism. I edited the camp newspaper called the Sourdough Sentinel, and I worked it up into the largest military newspaper in Alaska, and in the process gave myself a nervous breakdown. And so I was sent out to the Aleutians to recover. And of course, I fly out to the Aleutians, landed in a downpour, cold, nasty Aleutian weather, and I was handed a fishing pole and told that I had to catch my own dinner. You see, well, that was not exactly recuperation. So how I really recovered was that my mother was dying of cancer in Indiana, and I went home on an emergency leave, and that ended my career in Alaska. She held on for much longer than she should have. I couldn't even recognize her when I saw her, and she struggled to, as I came in, to ask if I had something to eat, and then in 5 minutes she was dead. That spurred me to work with the subject of Eat Die. And of course, Eat Die is a diptych. The two paintings should belong together. But in the course of time, they got separated. its biggest realization, of course, came in 1964 at the New York World's Fair, with a large electric eat sign that unfortunately I never have seen lit because the fair officials had to turn it off because people were forming in front of a theater to want to get something to eat, and there was nothing to eat. Hug and air, and it should be in that order. Hug was the only word that or the most frequent word that my mother used in relation to affection. In other words, give me a hug and that sort of thing. And of course, in the Puritanic tradition of America, that's getting close to being sinful, you see. Hugging is airing. In my own sculpture, I prefer what probably were mainly beams because they relate in form to the ancient herms which the Greeks and the Romans used, and most all of my wood pieces are herms, which Hermes was the messenger of the gods. And as a painter and as a sign painter, I feel that I'm delivering messages myself. The Mother of Us All, which is filled with characters from American history, from Susan B. Anthony through John Adams to Daniel Webster, a real circus of Americana. All in all, I spent 12 years working on this opera, doing the sets and costumes. The lead romantic heroine in The Mother of Us All just happened to be named Indiana Elliott, so I couldn't resist that possibility. Stein her text and her messages are filled with preoccupations with names and name changes, and right up my alley. Mainly because of one of my largest collectors, who was a close friend of the man who ran the Santa Fe Opera. It was brought to Santa Fe. Mr. Crosby, the owner of the opera, decided that that would be a fitting work to celebrate the bicentennial 1976. I spent a whole summer in Santa Fe. The opera house is absolutely beautiful, and everything they did there was very, very professional. Well, it turned out that the opera was a great success. It began with a fireworks display over the mesa in the background of the opera house, and it was a real Americana pageantry, and beautiful performance. It got great reviews. I was on the cover of Art News, the one of my sets that I did. The sets and costumes were all made out of felt, and I think there was some trepidation about that at the beginning, but if you've ever been in Santa Fe at night, it gets rather chilly. So those opera singers didn't really mind wearing felt costumes at all. And of course, the vivid colors of the felt simply translated from my work most vividly. The opera was only given a few performances. In the audience, I was very pleased to have Georgia O'Keeffe sitting there watching. And after the opera was given, the owner, who much preferred more classical kind of works, moved all of my sets out onto the mesa in back of the opera house and set fire to them. And that was the end of the mother of us all. The autoportraits really started on Quente Slip, and they started when my career really started. In other words, I felt myself a worthwhile subject for something by that. By 1960, things were happening for me. They and the Hartley Elegies are definitely my heaviest paintings. Rather rather chocked full of content, shall we say. I had a 12-year lease on the Bowery, and after 14 years had passed, remember, this is a block down the street from Louise Nevelson's studio. Across the street was Lichtenstein's studio. There were a number of artists living on the Bowery, and at that time the Bowery was still very much the Bowery. It was not gentrified in any way. I overextended my lease. The landlord politely suggested that I should remove myself from my 5-floor studio, and that was quite a burden. Finding the Star of Hope simply changed my life because I had only come here for in the autumn. I didn't want to be associated as a summer person, and of course September and October are the two nicest months on the island, and I was not too unhappy to leave New York because the pressure on me, the requests, invitations, etc., just got to be burdensome, and it was nice to get away from that, a telephone that never stopped ringing. My crew, mainly lobstermen here on the island, moved me. It took 2 vans, 12 trips to bring all my possessions from that 5-story building to what essentially at that time I had only 2 floors in this building. And it was quite a hassle. And that's when they rented that little grocery store, which turned out to be on the back lot of Marsden Hartley's house when he lived here in 1938. And it was just that coincidence that propelled my interest in Marsden Hartley. I'd never been particularly interested in him before. And that was the beginning of the Hartley Elegies. And I probably spent about 6 years working on the Hartley Elegies. All in homage to Marsden Hartley, who probably every day that he went to the post office, he walked right across the front of my building. Well, one of my favorite American paintings at the Metropolitan Museum is Demas Figure 5, and I expanded it into several canvases, and it's probably what I consider my one of my very best works. There was a play by Edward Albee which got great attention at the time. This is early in the 60s. Albee's work also was autobiographical. And I went to see The American Dream and was obviously struck by it. And that painting was probably the most important that I ever did because it was hung in a two-man show in a less than conspicuous gallery in New York, and absolutely nothing happened for either of us. Nothing sold. But when the show came down, Alfred Barr, the director and the founder of the Museum of Modern Art, happened to saunter in and saw it and acquired it for the Museum of Modern Art. And that more or less started my whole career with kind of with a bang, with a bang. I continued that over the years. The second dream was purchased by the president of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Modern Art. The third dream was my first painting acquired by a museum in Europe. It went to Eindhoven, Holland. The fourth dream went into the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C. The fifth dream went into the museum in Toronto, and that one is related to the Demuth Five. Then the sixth dream um, didn't immediately have such spectacular success, but of course the sixth dream is about my father because he grew up in a family of six, born in June, and worked for Phillips 66. And when he left my mother, he went to California on Highway 66. So it very much became associated with him. There are several sixth dream paintings, and they have gone to various and different places. The seventh dream had a much more spectacular career, and that was done. I was soon to have my largest retrospective ever in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Nice, in France. And the seventh dream, because it was Nice and it would be hanging in that particular museum, I decided to celebrate the American women who went to France and flowered, primarily Josephine Baker, the black entertainer, and Princess Grace, of course, who was Prince Rainier's wife, and then Isadora Duncan. And they all knew Nice very well, and that dream celebrated those ladies. The eighth dream, because the eight is related to the month of August. My mother was born in August. The eighth dream is an homage to my mother. That happens to be here in the house. And then the ninth dream, which will be my last dream, was the principal painting in my first gallery show in New York in years and years at the Casman Gallery, and that went into the hands of a private collector. That's the end of the American dream. I watched the destruction of the World Trade Center, and what I came back and painted after 9/11 was Afghanistan. Painting which very much came out of my Confederacy series, my protest against what was happening in the South in the 60s. One of the Mississippi paintings, Alabama painting, was shown at the Indianapolis Museum, and a young couple from the South had come to visit the museum and were oohing and awing how beautiful the museum was until they saw my painting, and then they dashed out the front door and said, "We'll never come back here again." You see, that's the kind of shock value that I like. The peace paintings have come about because of Mr. Bush's war in Iraq, not 9/11. I switched from a hawk to a dove. I'm glad I repaired that situation. Certain artists feel compelled to deal with, important issues, whereas other artists are painting flowers and nudes, and depends upon the artist's temperament. And I'm simply a person who am enormously interested in history and current events, and of course, with my peace paintings, I know they will have no effect whatsoever, but it's a wishful thought that they might possibly influence world developments. Obviously, they're failing completely. Art can have you know, a limited effect. Obviously, not too many people go to museums. More people are going to ball games and other things. We have lost our. I think we've lost our influence. As you may recall, back in the 30s, working class people were the subject of art. I don't think these days of affluence, too many people are very interested in working class people. I think working class people have been pretty well forgotten. probably more of my work is involved with the upbeat and the positive rather than the negative. But I can't forget the negative aspect. It's like eat and die. Unfortunately, eat is accompanied by die, and we're stuck with that problem whether we like it or not. Immortality is the artist's only chance, you see. I think your film looks very good.